Hello and welcome to Coaster Strike. My name is Tom, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you 5 tips and tricks for building better roller coasters in Planet Coaster Console Edition. Now these do also go for the PC edition, so don't stop watching just because you play on PC, and don't forget to stay to the end for a special in-game Easter egg to do with building roller coasters. So you can see here I've got the coaster building section up, and you've got such a wide variety of different coaster types in the game. You've got coasters like the F25 with a drive tyre launch B&M style track, and you can see there all the statistics, but the one that I'm going to be using today is going to be the Barguest, which is a Gerstlauer Eurofighter, which aren't too common in the real world, but it's one of the most versatile coasters in the game. So, to start off with, and I'll quickly say that this is more about making smooth coasters than making good layouts, because I'll do that in another video or in any of our how to build videos which are specific to a certain type of coaster. But this video is all about making smooth coasters which are enjoyable to ride for your guests. So you can see here right now I've made quite a messy layout which goes into the chain lift, and it's not great. But to smooth out Coaster Track, which is a special feature in the game, you simply hold down A on Xbox or X on a PlayStation and move the left analog stick around to select your area. Then by pressing A, it will smooth out that area, creating a much smoother transition between banking, turning, height variation, and all the stuff like that. This tends to be the thing that takes a mediocre coaster to a great coaster, because when you haven't got smooth track, it looks awful and jolty and bumpy, and so just doing this really improves the level of the coaster. You can also hold Y to get the radial menu and select certain features, so if I just wanted to change the height to make it better, I could do it like that. Now if you want that to get into the chain lift, I'll be honest, I don't think it's going to get that with just gravity, so I'll stick a launch in and create a nice smooth rounded section of track using the smoothing technique that we just talked about. The next thing I want to mention is make sure that you test often. The only way to know that your car is going to get around the track smoothly and at the right pace is by testing. So here I can make sure that my launch goes at the right speed so that it gets into the chain lift without taking off all of the guests' heads with too much lateral g-forces. I can also see here that the chain lift is far too slow. So you can now see that I've built a quite tall chain lift, maybe a bit too tall, but the technique I want to talk about next is the 4-meter smoothing technique. So to do this, you simply make sure that the track length is the shortest that it can be, and you build the layout like that. It can take a while, is the main issue with this technique, but it does get you a smooth coaster. Because of the way that the nodes work in this game, which if you don't understand is basically just the way that the coaster track works, means that building with 4-meter pieces and then smoothing them like this, 2 at a time, and you go along the track like that, selecting 2, smoothing a few times, and then moving along. It's a very boring and tiresome process, which is why I've got this sped up and time-lapsed. But the effect and the outcome of doing it is a much smoother and better coaster. So if you watch the POV here, you can see this section here didn't use the 4-meter smooth technique. It's a little bit rough, but by smoothing the track out, it's still a lot better than if you just used completely off the bat pieces. Apologies here, I forgot to speed up the chain lift at this point, I haven't got there yet. But as you watch the track layout, you'll be able to tell at what points the track length was a bit longer. So throughout this section, all the way through here, around this turn, it's a lot smoother because I used 4-meter smooth technique, and then it gets a bit rough here as I use the, 5-meter, I guess, and then it's smooth again there as I use the 4-meter technique. It's very interesting. No one's 100% sure why the game does it, but it does work. So, point number 4, I believe we're at point number 4. The next thing I want to mention is if your coaster is using inversions at any point in the layout, sometimes it's good to use one of the pre-made inversions. But for example here, if I used a pre-made inversion, the jolt between where the track was before and then into the pre-made inversion, it has this little rough patch because it wants it to be completely flat, the game. So you can see just here, I'll put an arrow in. There's this big hump which looks really unnatural and it's not great. So if I use that, it would be a bit messy, and you've got this ugly bump here and it's not good. So you can try and smooth it out, which sometimes does work, but usually it doesn't. So what I would usually recommend is building custom inversions. So if I get rid of this little hump here and I try and build myself a custom inversion, because that will match the area of land better, you'll be able to build a completely custom size, and it will essentially just be the same, except it will be better, just as long as you remember to smooth. That's my main message for this video, is just whatever you're building, whatever you're doing, smooth, 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 because the smoother the coaster, the better. Sometimes in real life they're not completely smooth, but in the game it just looks awful if it isn't. So if I now select this area, the area like the transition into the inversion, it will just be so much better. But now, having said that, you do have to choose the right moments, because sometimes in places like here, if I wanted an inversion, it might be better to use one of the pre-made ones. So none of these really go, they don't fit the area. I'm trying to find an inversion that would work, and you'll see in a second the one that I chose is one that dives down under the track, which would just be so much easier to use one of the pre-made ones. It wouldn't negatively affect the coaster because it's got a smooth enough transition, it's already flat, and it just nicely rolls down. So there you go. You can see I've now added some scenery and theming. You don't need to worry too much about that, I just got a bit carried away. You can also ignore the fact that all the guests are leaving the queue, that's just because of testing and stuff. But so I think that's all of the main points that I wanted to cover. I've got a few more that I'll just go over as we ride the coaster, and you can see what I did. All of it I've done just using all the notes that I've mentioned throughout. The layouts, I'll be honest, the layouts are not amazing, but I'll cover that in another video on how to get a good layout. And let's ride the ride. Okay, so some final notes, and later on at the very end I'll tell you what the Easter egg is that I mentioned at the beginning. So first one is always make improvements. As you're building the coaster, as I said at the beginning, make sure to test the ride, and then every time you do, see what was slightly off and change it and fix it and make sure that basically every aspect of your coaster is perfect. Because that's what I did when I was building this ride. If I saw a turn was too rough, I'd stop the test, I'd edit the coaster, I'd smooth it out, or I'd change the turn or the shape of it or whatever it was that needed to be changed, and I would fix the layout or whatever it was that was causing any issues. The next mini note is to ignore the statistics. So I'm not talking about like the G-forces, but the excitement, the fear, and the nausea. Because especially if they're under, they sort of push you towards creating quite an extreme coaster, and it seems to enjoy it. If it's rough, it makes it better because it brings up the excitement and fear, which is never good, and it always makes the coaster worse. So yeah, just in general, the stats really don't matter. If it says that the G-forces are too high, then pay attention to that, because then no one will ride it. But if it's too gentle, just ignore it, because the game is not great at deciding what makes a good coaster, because you want it to be smooth and the game doesn't really. And so my final mini note is in terms of the layout, because it's really specific to the model that you're working with. So like with this coaster, you've got the vertical chain lift, the drop, the different inversions, the overbank turns, which is very specific to this model in real life. So what I recommend is having a look at some in real life, and if possible, if I've made a video on it, watch the how to build video that I've made on the channel for that model, because I do a lot of research, I work out what those coasters usually do in real life, and it gives you a quick general overview of how to build that particular coaster. So I'll link the playlist in the top right now, and hopefully next time that you're building a coaster, you can choose the model, and then you'll be able to search for it on our channel, watch it, and you'll be able to build a really good layout, and then using all of these tips and tricks, you can make sure it's smooth and enjoyable for your guests. But now I promised a special in-game Easter egg for the end of the video, so let's dive into that. So you can see here, if I take one of these guests, and they're moving a bit faster, I pause the time, and I click on them, you can rename guests. And one thing that you can do is if you rename them to James Taylor, I'm not entirely sure who that is, it might be a member of the development team or a producer or someone who works at Frontier, but if you rename a guest to James Taylor, this is in the PC edition, then friction on coasters will be reduced, and basically they'll be able to go way faster, and they won't be dragged back as much, and they won't slow down over time as fast. Now, unfortunately, this does not work in the console edition, but there is a way you can change the settings. Because if you go onto settings here, and down at the bottom there is a feature which says coaster friction controls. If you make sure that that's on, then when you go over to the coaster, and if you go to the sort of customization tab, I'm not sure what it really is called, but you can see down here there's a feature for changing the friction controls. So the higher it is, the slower your coaster will go. Unfortunately, it kicks everyone off. And the lower it is, the faster your coaster will go. So you'll see, I'll show you now some shots of the coaster going on round with the higher friction controls, which means it'll be slower. So you should be seeing that right now. And you can see it doesn't do as well, and it won't make it round this inversion loop thing. And then when you've got lower friction controls, it'll be much faster, and it will speed around the track, and it comes into a station super fast. But yeah, there you go. Those were some tips and tricks for building roller coasters, Planet Coaster, and hopefully they should, be beneficial and helpful. And if it is, share it with any of your friends who possibly play Planet Coaster. And be sure to subscribe for more useful tutorials and tips and tricks videos like this in Planet Coaster Console Edition. But otherwise, I hope that you've enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.